For those of you that don't know me, I'm Wendy White and I'm Director of Library and Learning Services at the University of Southampton. And our panel that we're starting off with for this afternoon is on the very interesting topic of the library as a trusted steward. So there'll be no post-lunch slump allowed with such an invigorating topic for us to get our teeth into. So with a trusted stewarding topic, I'll introduce you to the trusty panel. In our expert panel, we have Rozz Evans, who's Head of Collection Strategy at UCL. Then we have Andy Appleyard, who's Head of Operations North at the British Library. And Joe Marshall, who's Director of Collections Management at the National Library of Scotland. So they'll introduce themselves and they'll say a few words about their topics, which are going to focus on, in these difficult times, ethics and trust in stewardship. And also we'll be looking at the emerging work on the National Print Book Collection, both really, really important and relevant topics. Just a reminder that for this session, the Q&A will be recorded, so you know for transparency. So we are, as it's a panel, encapsulating that. But we do have two presentations first as part of that panel discussion, and then we'll come together as usual at the end for a Q&A. Do think of your questions. We've had lively discussions already, so I'm sure we're going to again. Just before we start, I just thought I would frame this panel session a little bit by drawing on some of the thoughts that we've had from this morning. So from Christopher's talk, I'm going to sort of pick out really the fact that in stewarding our collections, we're really caring for the foundations of our mental wealth, which is something that came across this morning as a sort of thing for us to hold in our thoughts. Also collaboration in the face of those sector challenges. A lot of what we'll be talking about here is about that collaboration. That's something Lucy was particularly referencing in relation to those sector challenges that we're facing. And lastly, I'm adding another C. Can you spot the C themes here going on? I've added one which is compromise, which we didn't name as that word this morning, but we did touch on in our discussions, which is about not always holding dear to individual things in our institutions or in our libraries, but having sometimes to let go of some things in order for collaboration to flourish. So we don't say, yes, we'll sign up for that collaborative endeavour, but if we could just keep these three things that we need, that will be fine. So three things just to hold in our thoughts as we go through our session. But without further ado, I will hand over to our first speakers, which is Rozz and Andy. Over to you.
Thanks very much. As Wendy said, I'm here today. I'm Head of Collection Strategy at UCL, Library Services, but I'm here today actually representing the RLUK Collection Strategy Print Storage Group, which is actually made up of a number of colleagues from various libraries and has been responsible for developing the idea that's become the UK Print Book Collection, which I'll henceforth be referring to as the UK PBC, if I can manage that. Before I go any further, I do want to mention the members of this group, because we mentioned collaboration is a big theme. But under the auspices of the Collection Strategy Network, we are a group of colleagues from across the country, and that's how we've managed to get as far as we have today with this project. So I'm going to mention, in no particular order, Joe Marshall from National Library of Scotland on the stage today, Hannah Mateer from Edinburgh, Sandra Brace-Girdle from Manchester, Sarah Thompson from York, Stuart Dempster, who, when he was involved, was at Southampton, Jonathan Chipp, who is now in the group, who is from Southampton, Michael Williams from Cambridge, and last but not least, Jane Saunders from Leeds, who's actually been leading us in this work, and I think honourable mention to her for keeping us focused and moving forwards. So today is a really brief presentation from us before the questions, and I'm just basically going to talk to you about what the UK PBC is, how we've got here, how it's going to work, and then what's next. So our vision statement and principles hopefully describe really simply what we're doing and why. The UK PBC is a national distributed collection of monographs, and that collection is based on a minimum number of 7 retained copies by the participating libraries across the UK. There are many advantages to a distributed approach, including maximum autonomy for libraries, allowing for action to be taken at a local level in the short term to safeguard printed monographs, whilst enabling libraries to reduce their collections in a responsible way. This enables everyone to work at their own pace. I should say that although we're looking at a distributed collection at the moment, this doesn't preclude any future plans for shared storage, should that be a thing for the future. But as well as the more obvious benefits around freeing up space with confidence, offering the chance to repurpose library spaces, the raising of awareness around rarity and scarcity for individual libraries is a really important aspect of this work. While we all know our own collections and where we are likely to hold high proportions of material which might have been traditionally considered scarce, normally older or more niche material, it might be a surprise to some that there is a significant amount of material we're holding between us that is fast becoming scarce in the UK, which isn't very obvious. The kind of material that's mass published, held by everyone, and therefore that we've all, over the years, been safely weeding away. The collection is based on the library records held in JISC's National Bibliographic Knowledge Base, the NBK, and it's the NBK that drives JISC's Library Hub Discover and Compare. It already contains over 160 million records and includes national libraries, copyright libraries, libraries across higher education and special libraries. And as a community, 202 libraries are already uploading records to the NBK. So the data already exists to help us take a national view of our collections, to maximise the value of that collection and to take a distributed approach to the safeguarding material for future library users. And obviously, it's not only just preserving the stuff, but it's preserving access to the material, which is really vital as part of this project. We understand that obviously there's many different kinds of libraries, and to reflect that, there'll be different membership levels for participating. So while this shared approach to collections management has long been an aspiration of the community, there are a number of drivers and factors that make this the right time and make it possible to do this now. While the vision was endorsed by the RLUK board in 2022, it does follow a lot of previous work undertaken by RLUK, Sconal and others, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. The success of the UKRR project has been a major factor, and the expertise acquired by the British Library in running this has thankfully not put them off, but quite the opposite, and the administrative support from the British Library is central to its potential success. Likewise, the development of the MBK and the support and expertise of colleagues at JISC there in managing and testing the data has been crucial. While there will always be discrepancies in metadata, we feel confident that the combination of the data in the MBK and a relatively conservative number of 7 as the retention threshold gives us a credibility and a sufficient robustness for us to proceed with this. The continuing development of the MBK is going to be important, though, to support this. We've learned from and engaged internationally, including with the North American Shared Print Partnership and the European Print Initiatives Collaboration, which is known as EPICO. We've engaged on a number of areas of shared interest, including distributed models and metadata standards. There's been interest from several countries in our approach, especially Sweden and Norway. We've been able to connect with and input into the revision of metadata standards for shared print programs led by the North American networks. These guidelines have been updated and were published earlier this year. And I mentioned already that although we're now in the point where we can actually make this happen, it's been something we've long wanted as a community, and many of us in the room have been involved in earlier pieces of work around this. So I thought it was really, really important to spend a moment reviewing the huge body of work done by previous colleagues in the space. So I've put loads of links on this slide for you all to take away and read if you either want to refresh your memory about how we got to where we are now, or if it might be new to you. This is all the background work that's got us to where we are today. And before I hand over to Andy, I just wanted to emphasise what a great example of community collaboration this has been between all the parties listed on the slide here. The engagement and commitment of all involved to this date has been inspiring and energising. And finally, in a world first, we are unveiling the first screenshot of the UK PBC website and logo. So in the middle of the screen, you can see this. It's not quite ready to launch, but it will be soon. So watch this space. And a massive, huge thanks to Melanie Chung, who is multi-talented, as we all know, who's designed both these for us. And without further ado, I'll hand over to Andy for the next bit.
Hi, everybody. I, too, am pleased to be here to represent all the hard work that's been undertaken by the UK PBC team, many of whom are here today, including British Library colleagues. We've got Alison Celine and Jonathan Heath, who've been involved alongside the team that Rozz described earlier. The team that Alison and Jonathan head up currently lead the UKRR project, and this UK PBC is following in the footsteps of UKRR, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, the UK research received took a similar approach to print journals and with the aim of deduplicating to create space. And indeed, that's what it did, really successfully, to the tune of 140 linear kilometres of shelf space was repurposed for all sorts of activities within the auspices of that project. So that in turn saved capital spend, operating spend, and it was quite a sea change in the way, you know, we manage our collections, working collaboratively, managing collections, managing services, and working as a community. And it struck me, and it reminded me of a quotation by David Lanks, and he said, "Bad libraries build collections, good libraries build services, but even great libraries build communities." And it struck me that, you know, UKRR and UK PBC actually tick all three of those boxes. So it's a great thing to do. Building communities requires collaboration. And as we all know, collaboration goes right to the very core of what we do, how we do it as libraries, how we work together. And the concept of a shared national monograph collection, it's easy to grasp. It makes absolute sense, not just for ease of access, not just for space saving, not just for cost saving, which is fairly topical right now, as we all know. It makes absolute sense, but also for preserving rare and unique content, which in the current environment, when libraries are struggling for space, struggling for investment in more space, then that's a really important thing to do, looking at the aspects of access and preservation. In terms of where we've got to in terms of the project, we've now got a programme manager, which is super. We've got a draft memorandum of understanding which sets out the membership agreement and a framework in which the project will use going forward. We've developed the membership models. So there are basically three categories. There are participating, retaining, and receiving. And these three categories define how a user, how a library can use and participate within the project in the same way we did with the UKRR. And it's all defined and makes sense in the membership agreement, which in turn informs the roles and responsibilities of libraries who sign up to it, of course. The National Bibliographic Knowledge Base, which has, I understand, 160 million records in there. Neil's here, so I hope I've got that number correct. And the tools that within the NBK, as Rozz said, the Hub Compare and the Hub Discover are vital ingredients to delivering the project that will allow users to participate and do what we do well. Rozz also mentioned the 7 copies. It's always the danger of having 2 speakers repeating what each other said. But 7 copies, it's interesting to expand that a little bit more, that the number 7, well, in UKRR, that number was 2, actually. Well, it was 3, and then it was 2. And the number defines the risk aspect, the risk of avoiding something that's rare and unique and not losing that forever. And the difference with UKRR is that the team, Jonathan's team, did shelf checks on every single item, and the libraries submitting their lists did shelf check of every single journal issue, which is a laborious and time-consuming process. Obviously, it reduces the risk, hence we only needed 2 copies in circulation. A copy at the British Library, which allowed us to have a central access model, and a copy out in the distributed collection within the HE library community. The number 7 in terms of UK PBC is defined because we're not doing the shelf checking, we're relying on the catalogue and holdings information. So that manages the risk of losing anything, but also is enough to allow us to deduplicate duplicate collections. So the number will work to create the space. Part of the project will involve measurement. And I should have moved my slide on, just remembered. It will involve measurement. We need to measure success. Obviously, we need to measure the benefits. We need to measure the progress. We need to seek the justification before scaling up. So measurement's a key facet of the project alongside change management. Change management, really important in projects, as we know. The people, the processes, the place all need factoring into any plan of change. And a useful lesson learned from UKRR is this concept of letting go of collections, of deduplicating on the premise that somebody else has it if we need it. And that's obviously quite a cultural change, and something we found was a hurdle, not a barrier, but a hurdle to overcome. Let's press the button. There we go. Before embarking on any complicated project, it's good to start with a pilot, and we did it with UKRR. We're going to do it with UK PBC. And incidentally, when Wendy talked about Cs, I noticed that I've interchanged collaboration in collection and collection in the abbreviation of UK PBC, but both of them work, so that's fine. Within the pilot, we'll have the opportunity to test the concept, to define the strategy before scaling up into the main project. Again, this, as I said, it worked to great effect on UKRR. The pilot focuses on monographs pre-2011. So that's an important point to note. And during the pilot, we'll test the Memorandum of Understanding, which is at the moment draft, and we'll share and prepare accordingly. So in the case of the two pilots, we've got phase 1 with Liverpool and Warwick and Bristol, and I should incidentally say a big thank you, a shout out to those volunteer libraries for participating. It's really helpful. And then in phase 2, we've got the V&A, we've got Manchester Metropolitan, Imperial College, London South Bank and Senate House. It's early days, but some of the early findings are telling us that how important it is to keep the NBK up to date and maintained. The NBK and those 160 million records is the inventory for everything that we're working to, that we're conferring, consulting. It's the backbone of decision making. So it's really important that we keep that and maintain that. And when decisions come from the team, having submitted a list and we get the decision back, yes, you can dispose, it's important that we update the NBK as quickly as possible so it remains real time and current. And then any subsequent decisions made off the back of it are accurate and up to date. So that was an early finding. Another early finding is the use of local record numbers because they're unique. It's important we use unique numbers, not ISBNs, which, as you know, could have multiple records. And then in terms of early findings, two of the early adopters who have submitted quite a lot of lists and processed a lot of material have found the level of disposal to be more or less in accord with the expectation, and are seeing, the ability to reduce print collections safely, collaboratively, and create the space that's so necessary right now. Next steps. Okay. Next steps, my last slide. So, having tested and refined the tools, the approach, the documents, the system and the processes, we'll publish that information on the new shiny website coming soon. So look out for that. They'll all be available there to consult. Helped by the British Library team who can assist in the use of those. We can review the roles and responsibilities as predetermined within the membership model. For example, legal deposit libraries and the national libraries, their role, who ideally will be receiving libraries. And that's the role that acts as the recipient for collections to any university, any academic library looking to remove content, transfer content. The receiving library will be the custodian of that if that's necessary. So it's a big role and an important one, and one that Joe and I have just been talking about. Finalise the procedures, guides and templates, which, as I say, will be on the website, and Jonathan's UKRR team will be there to help how to join, how to upload records, how to use the compare tool, all these things that are so necessary for the process. The threshold for non-UK content has been adjudged to be 7. Similarly to UK content, it's arguably less risk, but for now we've decided to keep that number the same. and we can review that later at the end of the pilot. And then finally, the governance structure. The governance team will be shaped around the current project team, and that will deliver the advocacy, define the principles, the objectives, and report progress and communicate as it progresses. That concludes my part of the presentation. I'll hand back to Wendy. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Wendy. Great to be with you this afternoon. I'm Joe Marshall, Director of Collections Management at the National Library of Scotland. And just to give a big thank you to Andy and Rozz and the rest of the group that's been working on the UK print book collection, which I think is a great example of responsible stewardship, which I'm going to talk to you about now. So, responsible stewardship and ethic for collections in hard times. When I put this together, I didn't know, of course, that Christopher Smith was going to give the presentation he gave this morning. But I think this really speaks to what he was talking about, the morality of what we do, grounding that and that really strong ethical basis and making that advocacy case, all the things he spoke about this morning. I hope what I say now will chime with that quite well. So, what is responsible stewardship? So, a few terms, first of all. So, it's about people. It's about choices that people make, things that people do. Obviously, collections are there somewhere. But these are about things people do, caring for things for other people. So, it's very much about people and their responsibilities to the present and to the future. And being responsible, being liable, to be called to account. And all of us, of course, will be called to account at some point. So it is about people. The person in the picture there is Claire, my newspaper conservator. So this is going to talk about stuff, about content, but at the heart of all this is people. And what I'm going to tell you about today is really the emergence of responsible stewardship as a theme within the National Library of Scotland. So I'll say a little bit about what we mean by responsible stewardship, but I think it's also just quite interesting to share the journey and the sense of how this concept came into use within the library, because it wasn't a smooth process and it threw up some really interesting, sometimes some really quite difficult things along the way. So a bit of context about where this comes from. So we are the National Library of Scotland. We do look after stuff. We've been stewarding stuff for 100 years. We're 100 years old this year. So there's nothing very new in that, you might say. In our previous strategy, we had a theme called safeguarding collections. Again, it's about conservation, preservation, keeping the stuff safe, all familiar territory, I'm sure. When I joined the library for my second stint in 2019, one of the things I wanted to do was give the library a formal collection management policy, which it hadn't had before. And this was kind of a move on from just safeguarding things and keeping them safe. So we wanted to talk more about active collection management and making decisions that were not just about accumulating stuff. So we did set up a CMP, and a lot of good work followed from that, a lot of work around disposal, around deaccessioning, making hard decisions, doing things differently. That was really valuable. But what we found was that collection management policy didn't really grip people as a phrase. If you go out, it doesn't have that kind of buzz, does it? So we sat in the group and we sort of mulled over this, and I think it was my former colleague Helen Vincent, who's now at the British Library, who said, responsible stewardship sounds nice. And we quite like that. And you say, well, that sounds like a good phrase. Let's play around with that and see where that goes. And we did play around with it. So in 2022, we took a discussion paper to the leadership team and said, how would it look like if we started talking about not just about safeguarding and preserving, but about responsible stewardship? What would that sound like? And I'll say a bit more as we get into the paper about how that landed. It was interesting. We followed this up with a series of workshops in 23-24 where we got staff to play around with the idea. That was, again, I'll say more about that as we go on, but that was really important to get the staff to engage with it. And it has now got to the point where responsible stewardship it's a key plank of the library's new strategy, which we've published later this year. So, this paper is really about how we got from where we were to where we are right now and where that journey is going. And again, just a bit about the context. So this is the context in which I'm operating. We're a legal deposit library. We're established by Act of Parliament. We've got statutory functions which are laid out quite clearly. So it's about preserving and conserving, making collections available. 26 million items, 200 kilometres of shelving, 60 million items in total, 1,000 years of cultural heritage, particularly for Scotland, and that kind of range of formats, books, newspapers, manuscripts, sound, data sets, all the things you would expect of a national library. So really rich cultural heritage assets, information provision, equally important. This is the context in which we operate, and I hope many of you can relate to that as well. So what's different about this responsible stewardship thing? So I mean, these are a few things that we think are different about this kind of language. So I mean, it is about language. It's about talking about things, perhaps things that we've done for hundreds of years, but talking about them in quite a different way. And talking and thinking are so intimately related. Thinking about things differently as well. What is the ethical framework for what we're doing? Why are we doing the things that we do? Talking honestly about what we do and admitting when we get things wrong, that was really important for us. Most of us, we love to laugh at the decisions made by our predecessors. I'm sure all of you can point to things that, what on earth did they do that for? That bizarre decisions and choices. It's not so comfortable to think that in 100 years' time, people are going to look at us and they're going to say exactly the same kinds of things about us. Why the heck did they do that in 2025? So, this is about being open about that. That we make choices today because we have to make choices. They might not be the right ones, and we have to be honest about that. Documenting what we do and why we do it, that's really important. Shared responsibility for all staff. So one of the things that came out of our workshop discussions was that there was a bit of a disjunct in the library. So in a library like ours, we have a huge strategic focus on outreach, on engagement, on developing audiences, on diversifying audiences, and that's absolutely where it should be. At the same time, most of the staff in the library do not directly work with users. They're driving the vans, they're doing conservation, they're processing acquisitions, they're cataloguing, they're working behind the scenes. And there was a sense that there was a drift, a separation between the majority of the staff and where the library was going as an organisation. So, a sense about, can we bring something back together where everybody feels a sense of ownership? And that's particularly about valuing the day-to-day, the behind-the-scenes work, and making that connection between the collections and the strategic priorities. Justifying our existence as a collecting organisation. Again, going back to what Christopher was saying this morning, nothing can be taken for granted now. You might think I feel really secure here, part of a national library. I don't. I think we're all of us under question, under scrutiny, and in a way that's how it should be, but nothing can be taken for granted the way the world is now. Making intentional collection decisions. So that was a really big part of responsible stewardship. Making choices, not just because they were the choices that had been made before, but actually really thinking things through and articulating them clearly. There's something about balancing the current audiences and the future audiences, that handshake between the past and the present, just really being aware of that. Working in partnership. So again, a lot of this is chiming with the earlier presentations. Certainly I think in the past, probably the National Library of Scotland, did feel it could stand on its own feet. It was proudly autonomous, self-sufficient. That just doesn't work now. The world is too complicated, it's too diverse. We can't effectively do everything we need to do by ourselves. And being self-critical, open to change. That's really important, not to make people feel bad, but just to get everybody to dig into what they're doing and why they're doing it. And leading on to that continual review of practice, looking at skills and just getting everything out on the table. So I'm now going to show you a couple of slides that we used in the workshop presentation. So these are the slides that we used as a provocation for the discussions in staff. So first of all, we gave a list of things that you think, perhaps this is not responsible stewardship. And it'd be interesting to know, whether this chimes with anybody's experience. Upholding structures and grades and titles. We're a traditional hierarchical organisation. Some of us are quite invested in these things, but it's not responsible stewardship. I have heard it said to me that for some categories of collection, the library has a 0 level of risk tolerance. If that were true, we wouldn't do anything. We would just lock it away and keep everybody out. What is the point of that? Making emotive appeals. Now, I have done this myself, particularly in my former job as head of special collections. You get very lyrical about, we must preserve the integrity of the collections. Well, let's call these things out. What does that mean? What are you talking about? Let's really drill into these things. And then it gets uncomfortable. So, all of us, who deal with donors and people who give us stuff, we make all these grand promises about, we'll preserve your collections in perpetuity. It's not true. We won't. We can't. Organic materials don't last. So why do we say this stuff? And actually, once you start being honest about the fact that your collections don't last forever, that's really liberating, because you can think more concretely about lifespans, about things you can do now that will benefit people now. So you're breaking with some of these cliches and things that people say without really meaning it. Similarly, saying, if we have enough money, we could collect everything. And we could be comprehensive. Every single gap could be filled. We know it's not true. We all know it's not true. So why do we talk about it as though it were true? Why don't we stop pretending and just focus on what we can actually do practically? Ownership. Like many people here, I'm really invested in the stuff. I love books. I love handling things on a shelf, but they're not mine. They don't belong to me or the library. They belong to the people, the nation, people who are here now, people who aren't yet born, but they're not ours. And similarly, accumulating stuff, just for the sake of it. No. So, defending past practice, saying no to change, these are some of the things we really want to get away from. So who is a responsible steward? So, again, this is a bit of a provocation, but we wanted all staff to feel that they had a part to play in this. So we start with the cleaners and the security guards, because if we don't have them, we don't have anything to be responsible for. And we then, of course, we talk about the curators. Now, that's really important. The example we've got here is a curator deciding not to accept a donation. That does actually sometimes happen. And we do encourage people to take these hard decisions. It's not just about bringing more stuff in. Cataloguers, disposing of duplicate material, engagement officers, bringing school children in. Even a library leadership team can be responsible stewards for the kind of choices we make, where we invest, what we prioritise. It's not just within the library now, so the boundaries of responsible stewardship are quite porous. Within legal deposits, our publisher community is really part of this as well. Our volunteers, the people who work with us. So that sense of responsible stewardship is an ecosystem. It's something that it goes well beyond the physical boundaries of the library. So some reflections on the journey. So, when we started talking about this, some people were really, really not happy. And it was certainly said to me, this is a threat to our strategic direction. This is going to take the library back to where it was in the past. This will go back to when it was just all about the stuff and not about the users. And there was real concern about that. Quite on the other side, I had it said to me as well, this is great. We don't need to explain to people what we do anymore. We can just get on with the stuff that we love. And this is. But when people get kind of anxious like that, I find that quite interesting, because you're touching a nerve. And this really did touch a nerve. There was something there that people hadn't been talking about, that hadn't been explored. So we kept going. And I think what was the real tipping point was when we did the workshops, because that brought together staff from across the library. We had, we did with the cleaners and the security guards come to these workshops, and they asked really challenging questions. Why do you do all this stuff? You're piling all this stuff up. What's it for? Who's ever going to look at it? So, getting the sense of that collective ownership once again, really, really valuable. So we started to think about this as a possible theme within the new strategy. We took it out to external consultation. I would say quite tentatively. We weren't sure how it would land, but the external stakeholders loved it. They really reflected back to us that, we like this phrase. We like the concepts you're talking about here. So, that was last year, and now it's definitely a phrase with weight within the organisation. So every business case that I see is now laden with references to responsible stewardship. It's all the way through. It's helped us make good choices. We've had 2 really difficult financial years. We had to sacrifice posts. We had to stop projects. I think the National Library and higher education we're kind of out of step. We have bad years when you have okay years, and vice versa. But responsible stewardship helped us to make good calls, I think, in those difficult couple of years. It's now really baked into the new strategy and governance. We've got a responsible stewardship board that's overseeing activity in this area. But I mean, I'm sure there's an awful lot more that we could do in terms of its theoretical and professional underpinnings. Probably a lot of what I'm saying just now isn't new. Other people are doing it, I know. Probably like many of you, I don't have a lot of time to read professional literature, but I'm sure there is a lot that could be written up about this as a topic. So the scope for research here, professional exploration as well. There was a really interesting project a few years ago called Heritage Futures, led by a guy called Rodney Harrison. They've published a really good book. I think UCL Press have published it, and it's on open access, so it's well worth a read. They did a big exploration which is quite parallel to what I'm talking about here. And they came to the conclusion that heritage is really about its building futures rather than trying to preserve the past. And that's what kind of we're doing here, even without really thinking it. So you probably get the sense as I'm talking. I mean, this isn't something that's crystallized. This is something that's quite fluid. This is in development. So it'd be really, really good to explore with all of you, what this might mean in your context and where we can go with this. And now, just a sort of for the final couple of slides. So we have a new strategy that's going to be published in September later this year. So this is the first time this has been shared outside the library. By 2025, under responsible stewardship, we aim to have done all these things. And some of these probably look quite safe on the surface, but underpinning them is interesting stuff. So there's making hidden collections discoverable. So we're really open about the fact that we have hidden collections, like many big libraries. We take on stuff and we don't always have the resource to get it catalogued, made it discoverable. We're exposing that, and we're really trying to tackle that. Security, that's a big thing for us. Storage is massive. The Scottish Government is really keen for us to collaborate with other organisations and find ways to share storage. How that's going to happen, we're not yet quite clear, but we need to find a way to make it happen. I could bore you all for hours about boxes. So if anybody is keen to talk about boxes, I love boxes. Boxes are great, obviously, for mitigations against dust and water and all of that. They also can really help with our net zero stuff. So where I want to get to by 2030 is where we have whole floors of the library building where everything is boxed. In that case, you've got microclimates, so you can turn off the plant. You can turn off the climate control entirely. That's where we want to get to. And then your energy bills come down, your carbon footprint comes down. Environmental conditions, so we're going to maintain that, but we're going to really challenge that and work out what environmental conditions are genuinely required. And conservation thought on this is shifting. We need to keep up with that. Digitized collections. So again, hot off the press, we're going ahead with a really exciting project to bring our collections on floppy disks back to life. So we've got about 60,000 collections on floppies, CD-ROMs. We're now going to do a big push to start making those available again. So this is particularly things like computer games from the 1980s, 1990s, massive unlocked potential. So if anybody's got collections like that, please come and see me. We talked about partnership, so legal deposit is our absolute bread and butter. We really want to see legal deposit back to where it was before the cyber attack on the British Library, but we can't do that by ourselves. We've got to do that, obviously, working with the British Library, Andy and his colleagues, with the other legal deposit libraries. So again, that sense of shared stewardship. And a very practical one, deposited collections, again, exposing things we got wrong in the past. In the past, the library was very keen to take on collections from the great and the good. Oh, yes, Lord so-and-so will look after your collection for you. And lo and behold, here it is still 80 years later, and it hasn't done anything. So regularising those kind of arrangements and making sure that the stuff is accessible and usable, really important for us. So the other themes within the strategy, which we can talk about, are going to be sustainability, that whole green agenda, and connection as well, that audience, outreach, equality and diversity agenda too. But responsible stewardship is there as one of the three at the heart of what the library does, and I'm really, really proud that we've got to that point. So in the final minutes, really this is just another point on a journey. How will we know if we're successful? We've got some targets, we've got some measurables, because there's a lot that we don't know. I think there are a lot of risks and barriers around this, but we would really like to have conversations with all of you about this, because I think this hopefully chimes with many of the things that you're grappling with in your libraries as well. And really happy to share more about any of the things I've talked about just now. And thank you all very much, and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Simon Baines, University of Aberdeen. A couple of things for Joe, actually, which, Joe, that was brilliant. Really enjoyed that. Thank you. You talked about what an ethical, what your responsible stewardship policy was, and then a slide on what it wasn't. And I just thought it would be useful to have a couple of examples from a couple of the things you said. So you talked about an ethical framework, and I wondered what that looks like in practice. What does that framework drive in terms of what you're doing? And on the other side of the coin, what it's not, you talked about it's not a zero approach to risk tolerance. And again, I wondered what you meant, if there's an example you give around that as well. Thank you.
Can you hear me with the mic on here? Is that working?
Yep, it's working.
Yes, good. Yeah, great question, Simon. So, I mean, the honest answer is that we haven't got a document that is our ethical framework for responsible stewardship. This is something that we're forming at the moment, and I think it's about being honest. It's about being open, and it's about recording the decisions that we make. And and it's not as though we're starting from a completely unethical position. But I don't think we've ever really thought through collections decisions in that way. I think the inclusive aspect of that is really important as well. So probably in the past, most stewardship decisions were driven by the curators. So that's where the power in the organisation sat, and they were the ones who made the choices. And often those were good choices. Now, where we're getting to, in a sense, that is much more of an organisation-wide, a holistic approach to making decisions. But this is not yet fully formed. So, we want to be ethical. I think we need to also learn from everyone else here and how you're articulating your own ethical positions. In terms of good examples and bad examples, so I think one of the examples I would give is, as part of our centenary, we're doing a big programme of loans to other collections around Scotland. It's called Out With. And in many cases, this is taking collections out to venues where they've never been shown before. So it's, traditionally, we loan things, we sort of wait for somebody to ask. And somebody's doing an exhibition, can we borrow a book? Yeah, fine. What we're trying to do now is actually be proactive and go out to people and say, we've got content we think you might like to see. It might be good for your audiences. We would like to loan it to you. Would you be interested in that? That's changing our risk dial, and in some cases that's going into venues that perhaps don't tick all the traditional boxes for environment and security. But we can be okay with that if we discuss things. We look at what we're taking, how they're going to mitigate those risks. So, I mean, there was an approach in the past where sometimes things just wouldn't get done at all because it was felt that the risk was too high. And again, if you don't do anything, what are we here for? That is just one small example. But I think over the next few years we're going to be really pushing the boundaries of risk, and some of this might be around copyright, it might be around the legal deposit legislation. Perhaps some people are starting to feel nervous, but I mean, we are traditionally we are quite a risk-averse profession, particularly when it comes to national libraries, legal deposit libraries. So we're going to be making ourselves feel uncomfortable. But again, going back to the ethical point of view, I think that is part of being ethical. It's not about staying safe.
Thanks. I mean, Andy, Rozz, have you got things that you would like to add to that in terms of the sort of national print book collection? One of the questions might be, are we on the right place on the risk dial in relation to that development?
Well, we talked about risk and the number of copies that we deem as acceptable in terms of risk. As Joe says, it's never zero risk. It's about managing that risk, informed management. So that's one particular example. I thought it was quite interesting what you said there, Joe, about legal deposit. It's something we've thought long and hard about, the use in our document supply service. We've never used legal deposit, but it's interesting for academic use where we've got more freedom, whether it's ethical to use legal deposit for satisfying requests there. And I think that's a door we'll be pushing against going forward in a similar vein to what Joe described.
I would just add about risk. Slightly different aspect of it is that we need as many people on board as possible to make this a credible, sustainable project. And so we've spent a lot of time making sure we're engaging with all the different kinds of libraries, all the different groups. So the risk to this project would be if we don't get enough buy-in the onus is on fewer people, the whole model can't work. So I suppose in terms of spending time assessing risk, checking out the pros and cons, and hopefully putting everyone who wants to be part of this into a position where they can be with as few obstacles as possible has been an important part of the work, I think. And you mentioned the 3 different kinds of memberships, so it's understood that some people might be able to commit to, if they know that they're holding one of the last 7, not throwing it away, but can they hold it? Possibly not. This is where the next level comes in. Other libraries might be able to commit to keeping it there themselves. Otherwise, as Andy mentioned, receiving libraries is going to be another layer where some libraries will take content in from libraries who can't hold it. So in terms of balancing risk and participation, we have tried to think about all of those aspects as well. We've had lots and lots of conversations across the community, not just RLUK, SCONOR as well, and beyond. So, and also that our appetite for risk, we've sort of been in conversation with international projects as well. There's actually been quite a lot of research, particularly in the States, about what is the perfect number. I think we talked about the perfect number endlessly, almost as much as the name, probably. So yeah, hopefully we've sort of addressed all the aspects of risk from that perspective as well. But yeah.
That's a really interesting sort of observation, I think, in relation to risk. And I think we're so used to our own institutional risk registers that kind of sort of look at the institution down. Probably what we've not spent as much time looking at is sort of outwards to the kind of collaborative sector level risks and the balance between that in terms of how we work within the institution, but also in that collaborative space, because it strikes me this could be a bit of a tension there that might need a bit of unravelling to do the re-ravelling that Christopher was talking about this morning. More questions? So I'm going to stand up because I can see the floor better if I'm standing up. Yeah.
I can never resist an empty void. In digital preservation, we have a concept of a designated community. And you mentioned, Joe, the cleaners and janitors asked you why and who you're doing it for. So I was wondering, who is the designated community here? How did you respond to the cleaners and janitors?
I mean, for the National Library of Scotland, it's relatively straightforward. Our designated audience is the people of Scotland. That's where we start. But of course, we have a much wider community even than that. So we're open to anyone who wants to use the collections. I mean, I think that was the message really to the cleaners, the security guards. That it is for everyone. I mean, it's not just for the academic researchers, for the students. The people perhaps they might be more used to seeing coming in, and that's I think was really important for people to hear, that it was for them and for their communities, for their street as well. I mean, traditionally, I suppose we have had a fairly narrow demographic. And, I mean, our audience was, it was particularly academic, particularly sort of older. That is now changing quite significantly and quite radically. So I mean, we are, I think probably for the first time we're starting to talk genuinely, that this is now for the entire community in Scotland. I mean, there's a long way to go, but I mean that was important for people to hear. And and what I want to say is, do say to people is, you can go home from your job as a driver of the van. You can come back on Saturday and you can come into the reading room and look at a medieval manuscript, because that is absolutely your entitlement, just as it is to Professor X who's sitting on the seat next door.
Is there anything that you'd like to add in relation to sort of broader communities, perhaps in relation to the idea of a national print book collection? I'm just remembering one of the discussions we had at Southampton, actually, with the recent sort of big stock project that we've undertaken, is a debate around if the stock is a lot less visible on the shelf in relation to your regional civic offer, and it's a way in a store potentially as part of a more sort of generic approach to collection, or a more holistic view of a collection. Again, there's a bit of a tension there in terms of visibility to our more immediate kind of civic environment in terms of perceived accessibility. So whether there's something there around kind of the sort of debate about who our users are for the collections and how we handle that in this new kind of world that we're working in.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, you know. We shouldn't put communities behind garden walls. Communities can grow, and we found that with the UKRR. It started off with academic libraries, all academic libraries, but gradually what we're seeing now is interest from research libraries, from museum libraries, from public libraries even, who have research collections, and a lot do. So this expanding the community is a good thing. And Rozz talked about the European discussions we've had. There's a group called the EPICO, the European Print Group, and that right now we have a parallel special interest group looking at metadata and how to use a standard metadata configuration that describes a retained item. So we're all doing it the same way, which helps this community aspect.
Yeah, sort of related, but not entirely. Thinking about the sort of relationship European-wide and beyond, we've referenced the fact we're using the same threshold for non-UK published material as other material at the moment, but that we feel quite strongly that we're going to probably need to review that relatively soon. But that doesn't preclude some sort of European initiative, and that was something that came back at the last conference we were at, the EPICO conference, from colleagues, particularly in Scandinavia, sort of welcoming a European approach to it. So knowing that, okay, in this country we might only have 2 copies of something published in Germany, for example, but if in Germany there's multiple copies, then we can sort of take a European, bigger approach to it. So again, expanding community, but that's why the interoperability of metadata standards and things like that is so important, because even within countries, that's been a bit of a barrier. So it's kind of led, particularly in the US, for example, to sort of smaller groups sort of working together. But now we've got to the point where there's a genuinely international standard that we can all work to. So that should open doors for the future, hopefully.
Mm-hmm. That sounds really positive, although I guess going back to some of this morning's conversations, it is sort of with a layer of geopolitical risk kind of wrapped around it in terms of the level of trust of kind of models going forward, which is, you know, also part of the picture. But interesting. Do we have another question? Yes, at the back.
Hi, I'm David Brown from the University of York. I think my question builds a little bit on Wendy's point about visibility of print collections. And one of the arguments we hear most often from our academics, and they say it's on behalf of the students as well, is that they want us to have really robust print collections to aid kind of serendipitous discovery of content. Actually, how many people stand in front of the shelves and do that is debatable, but that's the argument that we hear, certainly. And I wonder to what extent you can articulate an argument to people who, to borrow a phrase from Tom's slides, would like us to be a kind of library of splendid isolation, that think we ought to have everything because they can discover it more easily. And to what extent can we replicate that sense of serendipitous discovery electronically, especially across a distributed collection?
Excellent. Who wants to take that first? Distributed serendipity in the digital age.
Do you want me to? Shall I start?
Give it a whirl.
Yeah, I mean, I can completely relate to that, and yeah, I think there are some people who have an imagined idea of how they use libraries and how their community uses libraries, which doesn't actually correspond to reality at all. And yeah. I don't necessarily see these people who are spending their lives browsing the older print stock in the library. So yeah, I think that there's certainly something there around dialogue and education and listening, but also observing what the reality is on the ground. And I mean, we can't build libraries as they were hundreds of years ago. That isn't a meaningful or responsible thing to do. So I mean, I would absolutely agree that I mean the way to deal with I mean there has been a loss in some senses, but we should be doing everything we can to leverage the technology so it can help us with that discoverability and that serendipity. I mean the technology is there. I mean it just needs development, it needs investment, it needs all of us to engage with that. So. Yeah, I mean, I don't buy the argument that it makes any sense to go back and start recreating past models, which, to be honest, probably never even really existed. It's a fantasy, I think.
wallpaper, isn't it, in a bit of a way? But
Yeah, well said, Rozz.
I think there are, obviously we've all been trying to address this electronic serendipitous searching, haven't we? And there's various bits and pieces that are sort of available but don't really replicate that experience. So I think one of the pieces of work that's sort of ingrained in the project is helping libraries to advocate for this approach, selling the benefits not only to the libraries but to their academic communities. That's come through quite strongly, as in getting your senior management institutional buy-in is probably easier on one level because they want the space and they want everything to look new and shiny, and don't want loads of dusty books around. But at the same time, the academic communities, particularly in the arts, humanities, social sciences areas, are very into their books. And they do feel, we've still got plenty of academics who feel that if UCL doesn't own this particular book, it doesn't matter, we can get it to them in 24 hours and it doesn't matter who owns the book. They feel that there's some sort of lack of integrity, to pick up a word, collections integrity. I completely agree, by the way. I've used it so much in my career, but yeah, what does it mean? I think it's a piece around really having those messages for each of our communities to really sell the benefits. And the fact is, you're not losing something, you're gaining something, because collectively we are ensuring that all of you everywhere can get anything you need, and it isn't going to get accidentally lost or chucked away or under duress. We've all been under duress, and you've got to clear X amount of shelving, and this time there is no safety net. So I think it's about that advocacy piece, I think, and continuing to hope that somehow we can get the message across that serendipity is a thing, but there are many other tools that can actually help your searches to be really rich and find what you need and more than you thought you needed.
I think one thing I'd add, at Boston Spa, our shelf stacks are arranged by publication date in alphabetical sequence and not subject classification. So a serendipitous search could unearth all sorts of surprises. But no, seriously, I think the other thing that should be on the agenda is controlled digital lending. It doesn't aid serendipity, but it certainly helps sharing information easier, more cost-effectively, and in a greener way. I know it's very contentious, but it's got to be the way forward.